Because she's so shallow.
All right, we're going live, guys. We're getting going here.
Can you give
We got about 1 minute. And so before we get started, you want a popsicle?
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna do a quick. Obviously, there's some announcements going on. This week is pretty popular week. Shout out to my mom, who this day 15 years ago, my Uncle Brandy passed away. It's her brother, and so just shout out to my mom because I know she's probably having a rough day today. Tomorrow, May the 4th, be with you. So just remember that we've got Star Wars Day coming up, and so in fact, well, how many years is it? 8? Yeah. So for me, that's 8 years since I got my pacemaker put in, because I don't have that great of a heart, and so I'm grateful for May 4th because the 4th was with me.
And you became part robot.
Yeah, I became part robot, and so I've got my droid mechanism in here. And then another thing, using a pen. So did you know it's been 50 years since the Bic pen came out? It's the 50th anniversary this year. It's their longest lasting pen, and so I'm sure you guys are familiar with these little 4 colors. So you can go to Sam's Club. They got a whole pack of these you can buy now.
There's one with a pencil and a pen in it now.
Oh, now they got one with a pencil and a pen in it. So you have a pencil that comes out and a pen all in one. It's amazing, Obviously, it's lasted 50 years, so it goes well. Also, this week is Cinco de Mayo. And what else? What else is going on? What other announcements we have?
Tacos and beer on Tuesday. Taco Tuesday.
Taco Tuesday.
With Cinco de Mayo.
With Cinco de Mayo. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. So don't forget to do Taco Tuesday. So
yesterday was May Day.
Yes, yesterday was May Day as well. That was Friday. That was Friday, I think. May 1st. All right, so we're gonna get started.
Your dog is practicing right now.
My dog is practicing?
Look at she's just sitting right there.
Oh, sitting on the bench.
And next Sunday's Mother's Day.
Yes, and next Sunday's Mother's Day, so don't forget your mothers. Very, very important. So let's get started. This week's lesson is actually more historical than it is doctrinal. There is some doctrine involved, and so we'll talk about some of the doctrine with it. We are covering Mosiah chapter 7 through 10 this week. And I got all my little notes. I just kind of write out stuff. And so get your scriptures out, and we'll be getting started here. So first and foremost, as we jump over to Mosiah, if you recall, back in the Words of Mormon, so this was a couple lessons ago. It's the book of Ammon, if you want to look it up. It's kind of towards the end. And Malachi, at this point in his life, it's about 200 BC or so, and Malachi has basically received the small plates of Nephi. And it doesn't really say this, but there's kind of an indication that he was probably going to leave the plates to his brother. But his brother decided to go off and find the area of what they called Lehi Nephi at the time, not anti, but just Lehi Nephi, which was their original land that they landed. When the Lamanites and Nephites, are basically the people of Lehi, came over from the Americas in 600 BC, they had landed in this area, and that became basically their homeland and what they would call their inheritance. And so during Amaleki's time, it had been 400 years. And some of the people of his time decided, hey, we're going to go and see if we can go see how the Lamanites are doing. Let's go check out this land and see if they're still prospering or doing what they're doing. And let's see if we can, maybe inherit some of the land again. And when they went, if you go to Ammon chapter 1, verse 28, their leader was a strong and mighty man, but he was stiff-necked. They had contention, and everybody was killed except 50 people. They came back, but then another group decided, hey, we're going to go out again. And in that group, Amaleki had a brother that basically went with them. And that's all we hear about it. And then he ends his scripture. Now, we know that he decided to give the small plates over to King Mosiah, King Benjamin at the time. And so that's where the plates ended up. But today we're actually going to start learning about the story of these people that decided to go off and basically try to claim the land of their inheritance again. And we're going to learn why this leader was killed, first of all, and why only 50 came back, and then the second group that eventually left and went out. So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. So it's going to go back to the history here a little bit. So if we want to jump over to Mosiah chapter 7, we're going to talk about a man named Ammon. Now, there's another Ammon that comes later on. So we're not going to talk about, it's not the Ammon who's the famous missionary. This is a different Ammon who lives with the group in Zarahemla, which is basically part of King Benjamin's group. Okay, so he's part of King Benjamin's group, and Ammon decides, okay, the King Mosiah, after his father dies, Benjamin dies, Mosiah, they reign for a while, and then Mosiah says, hey, why don't we also send a group to find this land? Because I'm curious, I want to know what happened to those people back then. We had a good group of our people that left and went out there. So it'd be nice to kind of see what happened with them, especially because if you look at the end of verse 1 in chapter 7, they wearied him with their teasings. So there were a lot of people asking, hey, what happened to that group of people? Is there a way we can find out? Now, I don't know if they were teasing per se, but either way, they wearied him enough that he's like, okay, let's send a group out. So there are 16 men, including Ammon, that are sent. And they end up, so they wander for a while, but then they end up on this hill called Shimlam. And so if you can find that on verse, I don't know, or Shilem, sorry, Shilem, I said it wrong. Verse 5. So they end up on this hill, and Ammon says, okay, we're going to go down. There's some people down there, so I think this is the group. So him and 4 others, and he names them in verse 6. And they decide to go down the hill and kind of check it out. Now, on their way, as they go to check it out, they get captured by the king's men, if you will, and basically imprisons them and puts them in prison for 2 days. Now, I don't know about you, but you've got 12 people up on the hill of Shilem here, probably wondering what's going on. 2 days have passed. You know, it's not like they can just call each other or text each other and say, hey, I'm okay. They're gone for 2 days. The people are just kind of sitting there wondering, okay, what's going on? These 12 people. So the 4 get captured, they're taken to prison, they're put in prison for 2 days, and then the king, whose name is Limhi. So this group of people, the king is called Limhi. And we're going to learn a little bit about Limhi in some of these verses. Limhi is a very humble man, and he gives his basic genealogy in verse 9. I am the son of Noah, who was the son of Zeniff, okay? And so that's what we know at this point. We're going to learn about Zeniff here in the last chapter of the lesson today. And we came out of the land of Zarahemla, which was where King Benjamin's people were, to inherit this land. And if you look at the bottom, it's about 121 BC, so it's been about 80 years, okay, since the original group left. And so 80 years ago, the original people that left, and they had that little battle first and then sent out a second group, that's when this occurred. And so it's been about 80 years that have passed. Now, I desire to know the cause whereby you were so bold as to come near the walls of my city. So he's talking to Ammon and his 3 other compadres there. He's like, why in the world did you come within the walls of our city? Okay. Obviously, Ammon and them didn't know that there had been a lot of contention and wars that had happened with these people, which we're going to learn about later on in next week and subsequent weeks. But basically, he says, for this cause I have suffered that ye should be preserved so that I can inquire of you. Or else I should have caused and my guards should have put you to death. So now you're permitted to speak. It's a really good introduction, right? I would have killed you, but I want to know what's going on, so let me know. So Ammon was kind of excited that he got to speak because obviously his life has been spared at this point. Bows himself before the king and says, I'm so thankful before God this day that I'm yet alive and permitted to speak, and I will endeavor to speak with boldness. So he's like, I'm just going to cut to the chase, all right? We're just going to tell you what's going on. I am Ammon, a descendant of Zarahemla, and have come out of the land of Zarahemla to inquire concerning our brethren whom Zeniff brought up out of the land. So he's basically inquiring about Zeniff, and the fact that Limhi just said, yeah, well, I'm descended from Zeniff, that's great. That's exactly what we came here to find out. And look at Limhi's reaction in verse 14. He was exceedingly glad and said, now I know of a surety that my brethren who are in the land of Zarahemla are yet alive, and I will rejoice. And on the morrow I will cause that my people shall rejoice also. So he's actually kind of excited about this reunion now. Now that he knows who Ammon is, and he knows what's going on and why they're there to find them, just like they wanted to find Zarahemla's people or where King Benjamin is. And so they decide to go ahead and hold a celebration the next day. They want to rejoice the fact that this happened. Now, we're going to learn a little bit about Limhi's people in some of these verses, and so we're going to go through this a little bit. But again, we're going to learn more about their entire history in later lessons, okay? So, behold, we are in bondage to the Lamanites. I'm in verse 15. So Limhi's people is in bondage to the Lamanites. The Lamanites are the ones that control this entire land. And again, this was the original land where Lehi's family landed, 600 years. Well, actually, at this case, about 500 years before. So, and now behold, our brethren will deliver us out of our bondage and out of the hands of the Lamanites, and we will be their slaves. For it is better that we be slaves to the Nephites than to pay tribute to the king of the Lamanites. So think about this for a moment. Limhi just found, his brethren basically, a couple generations back, but still brethren. And he says, you know what? I would much rather go with you guys and go off with the Nephites, and let's be enslaved to you. Let's be a slave to you rather than a slave to the Lamanites like we are now. Now, I don't know about you as a leader, but how many leaders out there would just love to be slave, first of all, and much less a slave to nicer people? But that, what we can tell about Limhi at this point is he has been extremely humbled. Think about this for a moment. If you're willing to, trade one version of slavery for another version of slavery, you're in a really humble state of mind at this point. And so that's kind of the situation Limhi is in. You almost feel bad for him a little bit. And so they took Ammon out of his bounds. They gave him something to eat and to drink. In fact, they actually went back up on the hill Shiloh and they said, hey, 12 other people, come on down. We're going to give you food. And it's interesting, too, because in verse 16 at the end, they had suffered many things. They had hunger, thirst, and fatigue. And so, again, these 12 people on the hill waiting, they'd already suffered, thirst, hunger, fatigue. And then two more days goes by. But luckily, they went up there, they grabbed him, they brought him down. And now they're going to have this huge feast and celebration with Limhi's people. Now, I want you to think about this. 80 years have gone by, okay? Limhi and his people had never received the teachings of King Benjamin, ever. So they weren't familiar with King Benjamin. They weren't familiar with King Benjamin's, talk or speech or conference talk or whatever we want to call it, his address, I guess, with his people. If you recall in the previous lessons, we talked about King Benjamin and this covenant that the people had made with God to be called the people of God, or Christians, if you will. And so they didn't know any of this. And so Limhi gathers all the people together in verse 17. And then he speaks to his people, said, "O ye my people, lift up your heads and be comforted." Okay, so the first thing he's talking about, we have reason to rejoice. Let's be comforted. Saying, the time is at hand, or is not far distant, when we shall no longer be in subjection to our enemies, notwithstanding our many strugglings which have been in vain. Yet I trust that there remaineth an effectual struggle to be made. So he recognized that there still might be a struggle happening, but at this point, we have reason to rejoice because it looks like we're going to get out of here. We're going to get out of this situation that we're in. And look at what he says. So this tells us also a little bit about Limhi's thoughts and beliefs in God, right? Therefore, lift up your heads and rejoice and put your trust in God. Are you okay? Making weird noises back here. Put your trust in God, in that God who is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and also that God who brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt and caused that they should walk through the Red Sea on dry ground and fed them with manna, that they might not perish in the wilderness, and many more things did he for them. So it's interesting because what Lehi says is not only put your trust in God, but Limhi also talks about the things that we find in the Old Testament, some of the stories. And so obviously the truth is present with them to a point. We don't know how much or to what extent. We're going to find out. But there is some truth there. And verse 20, and again, that same God has brought our fathers out of the land of Jerusalem and has kept and preserved his people until now. And behold, it is because of our iniquities and abominations that he has brought us into bondage. So he also recognizes that the reason we're in the situation that we're in right now is because we made a mistake, okay? We made a mistake. And so because we made a mistake, this is the situation that we're in right now. And you're all witnesses this day that Zeniff, who was made king over the people, he being overzealous to inherit the land of his fathers, being deceived by the cunning and craftiness of King Limhi. And we're going to learn a little bit about that towards the end of this lesson, about Zeniff and his experience. So anyway, so he brings all the people together to let them know that, hey, we're not going to go into bondage. And look at verse 22. So verse 22 is interesting because we learn what kind of bondage this actually is. Okay, and I want you to think about this for a minute. So this he did, meaning the king of Lamon, or King Lamon, his name is Lamon, for the sole purpose of bringing this people, the people of Limhi, into subjection or bondage. And behold, at this time we do pay tribute to the king of the Lamanites to 1/2 our corn, and our barley, and all our grain of every kind, and 1/2 of the increase of our flocks and our herds, and even 1/2 of all we have or possess, the king of the Lamanites doth exact of us or our lives. So basically, he's like, we're taking 50% of everything, or we're going to take your life. Yes, Katie.
Shoot.
If you need to go to the restroom, you're welcome to.
And John.
So that's what's happening. They're paying 50% of everything, so half of everything. And if they don't, their life is at stake. Their life will be taken. And so that's the situation that they find themselves in. And he says in verse 23, is this not grievous to be born? Is this not hard? We have great reason to mourn. And so anyway, so he kind of talks a little bit about this and about the situation that they're in. And in verse 25, for if this people had not fallen into transgression, again, he's recognizing we made the mistake here. If we hadn't fallen to the transgression, the Lord would not have suffered that this great evil should come upon us. But behold, they would not hearken unto his words, and there arose contentions among them, even so much that they did shed blood among themselves. So they got into this situation. And in fact, in verse 26, and a prophet of the Lord have they slain. So not only did we reject the words, we also killed a prophet in the process. That's pretty significant. And again, we're going to learn more about this actual story in depth later on. But these are some of the things that have happened. And yet Limhi is still recognizing that we have to do what the Lord asks of us. And if it means that we're in slavery for this short period of time, then so be it. Now, I want you to think about that for just a moment. Because, you know, in today's day, we're not necessarily in slavery, but we can be enslaved by sin, right? We can be enslaved by bad habits. We can be enslaved by, doing wrong things or sometimes doing nothing at all. And so there are these moments in our own lives that, if half our time is being taken up, it's kind of a similar bondage, if you will. And so we have to think about what kinds of things enslave us and what kinds of things are we doing to not follow the Lord that leads to this enslavement. And so in the last little verses here, he just kind of talks about the fact that if we sow filthiness, then we reap the chafe thereof. If the effect thereof is poison. He's just kind of describing this dire circumstance for the rest of the verses. That the Lord has basically fulfilled his promise that if you don't obey, some bad things are going to happen. And it's going to be much more difficult for you in that regard. So that's kind of the situation that they're in. Okay, so chapter 8. So chapter 8 is kind of fun because Ammon now gets the opportunity to speak. And guess what Ammon speaks about? He speaks about King Benjamin. I mean, they just had this amazing address from King Benjamin and talked about becoming, a covenant people. Excited because he basically stands up before them to specifically talk about the words of King Benjamin. You can read that in verse 3. He rehearsed unto them the last words which King Benjamin had taught them and explained them to the people of King Limhi so that they might understand all the words which he spake. Now, the interesting thing about that is King Benjamin has been dead for quite a few years now, but it still had that much of an impact on the people that Ammon, one of the first things that he wanted to share was this experience from King Benjamin and the words of King Benjamin and this wonderful visit from an angel that King Benjamin had received and this exciting thing about the Savior coming to earth and being born in about 120 years from now. And so very, very exciting for Limhi to share this with his people. They also started kind of sharing the records. And so after Ammon kind of explains this and shares this experience from King Benjamin, King Limhi gets a little bit excited because he's like, there's something I want to talk to you about. And so in verse 5, he's like, there were these plates that we found. In fact, we actually sent a group out to find you guys before. So King Limhi is kind of sharing this experience. We sent a group out. We thought maybe we can find the people of Zarahemla again. But this group got lost. And as they got lost, they found this land filled with bones and basically, death, right? Obviously, it had been many years, and so the only thing that was left were bones. But there were also breastplates and a lot of swords and things of war. So it was obvious that a battle had taken place. And amongst all this battle, as this little group kind of searched through it, they found some gold plates. And on these gold plates, there were some writings. And King Limhi, he's like, I don't know what these writings mean, but the reason I would like to know if you actually can translate it. So verse 9, we find out it was 24 plates. So this little book that they found were 24 plates of pure gold, as it says, that were engraven on them. And then in verse 12, I'm desirous that these records should be translated in our language because maybe they'll give us a knowledge of the remnant of these people that had got destroyed so that we can see what happened to them. You find this huge group of people that obviously had a battle and there's just bones scattered everywhere and no other sign of life anywhere. But we have these plates of writings. And so obviously these plates were important to this people. And so Limhi's like, I would love to know how we can translate this. And so that's what I'm asking you, if you know if somebody can translate. And Ammon's like, you know what? I do actually. And in fact, our current king, King Mosiah, actually has this gift, just like his father, King Benjamin, had this gift. And so in verse 13, I can assuredly tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records. For he has wherewith that he can look and translate all records that are of ancient date, and it is a gift from God. So he recognizes where it comes from. And the things are called interpreters, and no man can look in them except he be commanded, lest he should look for that he ought not, and he should perish. So the other thing that Ammon reminds the king is the purpose of these translators is not for man purposes. Purpose of these are for God's purposes, and God is the only one that can allow this to take place. And in verse 14, or at the end of the verse, he basically says, and whoever is commanded to look in them is called a seer. And so then the king makes a comment about this word seer. And the king says a seer is greater than a prophet, right? Basically, he's greater than a prophet. And then Ammon reminds him, and this is some doctrine here, a seer is a revelator and a prophet also. So it's actually one person, if you will, but he has this power from God that allows this. And this gift, which is greater, can no man have except he should possess the power of God, which no man can basically have the power of God, except that, and he says, yet a man may have great power given unto him from God. So obviously there's no man that is as powerful as God. But again, we learn something about basic doctrine here. Our Heavenly Father has the ability to give man power when needed, especially in cases like this where these people who had been completely humbled based on their circumstances and were seeking refuge found these plates and wanted to know why these people were destroyed, because they themselves had almost been destroyed. And they thought, surely maybe these people have some extra information that can talk about why they were destroyed so that we can avoid that, because we've almost been destroyed. We've almost been in that situation. And so in verse 17, a seer can know of things which are past and also of things which are to come. And by them shall all things be revealed, or rather shall secret things be made manifest, and hidden things shall come to light, and things which are not known shall be made known by them, and also things which shall be made known by them, which otherwise could not be known. Okay? So we learn a little bit about this definition of a seer, who is also a prophet and a revelator. And Ammon declares that King Mosiah right now, who is the son of King Benjamin, is that man. He is the one that has received this power from God and can use it for wise purposes in order to accomplish this design of potentially translating this record. So there's a little bit of excitement there. And they're really excited. Limhi is excited. They rejoice about this meeting that they had with the people. And then we break. So from this point, we break into Zeniff. So we just talked a little bit about Zeniff before. If you remember, in Amaleki's time, Zeniff, we're going to learn, was actually part of that original people that went out to try to find the Lehi Nephi area, their land of original inheritance. And look at what Zeniff says. So I, Zeniff, in verse 1 of chapter 9, being taught in the language of the Nephites, and having had a knowledge of the land of Nephi, or of our father's first inheritance, and having been sent as a spy. So now we're talking about a spy, right? So that's who Zeniff was. Zeniff was a spy. He was sent into the land to check it out, okay? And as he was there, so their first thought is let's find out how big the army is for the Lamanites. Let's go take care of it, right? Let's take it back. But when I saw that which was good among them, or among the Lamanites, I was desirous that they should not be destroyed. So here this spy is sent out to, find out the army so they can go take them over. And then he finds that, wait a minute, there are some real good things happening among these people. Let's find another way. Let's make a treaty with them. And so he even talks about that. So he goes to his ruler and says, I would that our ruler should make a treaty with them, in verse 2. But he, being an austere and bloodthirsty man, so obviously this was a man of war, they got mad. And in fact, what happens at this time, they all get in a fight and an argument, and guess what? They start killing each other. So the very group that was sent out to, find out about the Lamanites, and Zeniff being the spy that was sent in to figure it out, they get in a battle and fight. And as Malachi said at the beginning in Omni, only 50 people remained. So 50 people from that original group came back. But in verse 3, Zeniff is still really thinking about this land and these people that are there, the Lamanites. There's so much good among them. And so he says, I was desirous to go up to possess the land, and it started again in our journey into the wilderness to go up to the land. And we know that group not only included Zeniff, but also included Amaleki's brother, okay? Because Amalekite, and keep in mind, this is about 200 BC, so we're back to 80 years, before, okay? And so Zeniff is so excited about the prospect of going back to this land that he goes into the king, who is King Limhi, and he says, hey, we would love to come in. We'd love to work with you. And King Limhi says, sure. In fact, I'll give you a piece of land. And so he gives him this, in fact, if you look at verse 8, he gives him this little land called Lehi Nephi. But Lehi Nephi is kind of like a money pit. It is not in good conditions. And in fact, if you read it, we began to build buildings and to repair the walls of the city, yea, even the walls of the city of Lehi Nephi and the city of Shiloh. So they received Lehi Nephi and Shiloh, but it is in disrepair. And so they've got to go in and take care of it and kind of fix everything. So they go in, they fix everything, they start to till the ground, and things are prosperous. In fact, they are prosperous for 12 years. And the Lamanites really don't do anything with them and just kind of let them build up that city again. Well, King Limhi sees it and says, okay, they're prosperous. We need to go in and take care of this. And in fact, what we find is that in verse 12, that the Lamanites were a lazy and idolatrous people. So Zeniff saw some good among them, but there were also some habits that they had that were still bad, such as being lazy and idolatrous and glutting themselves on the land. And so they basically decided, hey, we're going to take over the Nephites, and we're going to take everything that they've created and put them into bondage so that we can have all of their, what's going on with them, all their fruits, the good buildings, like everything that they're doing, this industrious people, we're going to take that from them. So they start wars. And by the 13th year, and the thing to really note about this, if you look at verse 17, this tells you a lot about Zeniff as a man. So Zeniff says that in the strength of the Lord did we go forth to battle against the Lamanites, for I and my people did cry mightily to the Lord that he would deliver us out of the hands of our enemies, for we were awakened to a remembrance of the deliverance of our fathers. So Zeniff was a faithful man. He didn't want the war, but yet here come the Lamanites. And he recognized that, and I'm sure he had this talk with his people, we need to come together and we need to go ahead and pray. We need to pray for help. We need to get the help that we need so that we can overcome this battle. And so in verse 18, God did hear our cries. He answered our prayers, and we did go forth against the Lamanites, and they won. They ultimately won this original battle. Now, the last chapter for the lesson today, and like I said, there's a lot of historical information here. But again, these little nuggets of doctrine, this importance of going to the Lord when you need help and recognizing what they did is they recognized we're in a dire situation here. And sometimes it's situations we can't help, like people coming against you, okay? And so they sought for help and they established peace again. In fact, they had peace up until about the 22nd year. So 10 more years goes by and they have this relative peace. And then King Lamon dies. King Lamon dies. His son comes back into power or comes into power. And guess what his son does? Verse 6. Came to pass, and I'm in chapter 10, verse 6. His son began to reign in his stead and began to stir his people up in rebellion against my people. Therefore, they began to prepare for war and to come up to battle against my people. So again, this battle begins, okay? And so one of the first things that they do is they prepare, their armament, if you will. They hide the women and children, or at least put them in a place where they can. I mean, he basically did. They hid them in the wilderness, as it says, and got everybody together so that they could go up to battle. Now it came to pass that we did go up to battle against the Lamanites, and I even in my old age went. Now the Lamanites knew nothing concerning the Lord. So he's recognizing that the Lamanites don't know about this. Therefore, they depended upon their own strength. Yet they were a strong people as to the strength of men. They were wild and ferocious, bloodthirsty, believing in the traditions of their fathers. And then Zeniff makes an interesting record here. He talks about the fact that the traditions of the Lamanites were because of 400 years of teachings from Laman and Lemuel way back in the day. And this is the last bit of doctrine that we're going to kind of talk about here as we end this lesson today. So he talks about what they believed in. Believing that they were driven out of the land of Jerusalem because of the iniquities of their fathers. So first of all, he thought, well, Lehi and them were bad. That's why we got kicked out of Jerusalem. Did you have a question?
I really like your story.
Okay, well, this is not my story.
Or like whatever it's called.
So they were wronged in the wilderness by their brethren. They were wronged while crossing the sea. They were wronged while in the land of their first inheritance. They were wronged because Nephi was more faithful in keeping the commandments. And so he was favored of the Lord. And I want you to think about that for a moment. How many of you know people who are happy or they seem like they're getting everything handed to them, if you will? Like everything seems to be going right for them. How many of you know people like that? This happens, right? And unfortunately, the Lamanites decided to look at it in a negative way. Oh, well, he's just favored because, he's more obedient. It's kind of a silly thought. But how many of us sometimes do this in our lives? Especially with social media and a lot of the things that are out there today, we can easily look at the good that's happening with people and be frustrated by that. And sometimes we'll even make up stories in our mind. We'll make up a story that says, oh, well, they're that way because of such and such, or they have this because, they inherited it, or we just start making up these stories. And oftentimes we don't really know why they're being so prosperous, or on the other spectrum, why somebody may not be as prosperous. And honestly, that's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong to think that. It's wrong to make up the stories. We don't know. We don't know their situations, what they've gone through. But regardless, they were wroth because they understood not the dealings of the Lord. They were wroth upon the waters because they hardened their hearts against the Lord. And you'll notice a pattern here. They were wroth with him when they arrived in the promised land because they said that he had taken the ruling of the people from their hands, and they sought to kill him. And again, they were wroth because he departed into the wilderness as the Lord had commanded him and took the records which were engraven on the plates of brass with them. And they said that he robbed him. The Laman and Lemuel like, Nephi robbed us. They took the plates. Well, realistically, the Lamanites probably wouldn't have used the plates for good anyway. They possibly would have melted it down or done other things with it. So it was good that Nephi left. But I want you to think about this. 400 years has passed since this occurred. And yet you have generations of people who were still living under that lie. Okay? They were still living under that lie. And for this cause, the king Lamon, in verse 18, by his cunning and lying craftiness and his fair promises, deceived me, Zeniff, that I have brought this my people in this land, that they may destroy them. And we have suffered these many years in the land. So Zeniff is recognizing that because they were so angry about what had happened 400 years ago, we're still in this situation. And so, again, he stimulates the people to go to battle, putting their trust in the Lord in verse 19, recognizing that we need to make sure that we involve the Lord in this process. They win again, and Zeniff dies. So Zeniff passes away and confers the kingdom on his son Noah. Now that's the end of this lesson, but I want to go back to this basic doctrine as we end the lesson today. I want you to think about in your own history, okay, especially in family, because this will happen in families a lot. How many of you have had contentions or misgivings or frustrations or whatever with a family member? How many of you are now sharing those same stories with your children? And having your children believe that, oh yeah, this is the bad person in the family. Don't talk to them. Don't have anything to do with them. Ultimately, those types of feelings and stories get passed down and passed down and passed down to the point that you have a group of people 400 years later that are angry at another group of people to the point of wanting to kill them and put them into bondage or what have you, all because of this tradition that had been passed down over hundreds of years. And I'm telling you right now that I have seen this in families. I have seen this in groups of people. I've even seen this at work. You know, in my work environment, how many of you go to work every day? And obviously right now we're not going to work, but how many of us go to work and there are also stories that are passed down over periods of time, even at work? And in those situations, because those stories are passed down, we as a people have these thoughts or ideas of, oh, that's what kind of person that is. Now, how many of you have potentially met that person that was ill feelings were talked about, and it turns out, wait a minute, I don't feel like any of that was true. And even if it was true, who is that person now? I think my girls must be relating it to things. So who is that person now, right? And so we have to think about that. All of us go through our ups and downs in our life. All of us go through these phases where, yes, we make mistakes and maybe we feel like we've been wronged. But the question is, what are we doing to move forward? What are we doing to not allow that to creep in and become the story that our children tell and become the story that others see and tell and make the story, when sometimes not all of it is 100% accurate, or even if it is accurate, does it apply today? And I think that's really what we learn in these chapters today. One, you have a people who put their trust in the Lord, and so they were able to overcome some of the battles that they went through, which were very physical. But spiritually, we can overcome battles by putting our trust in the Lord. And then the second piece of this is this concept of forgiveness, not hating. I mean, look at verse 17. They have taught their children that they should hate them, and they should murder them, and rob and plunder them, and destroy them. And so they have this eternal hatred towards the people of Nephi. I mean, think about what that must have done for those children, and the fact that those children couldn't learn the gospel or couldn't learn about the Savior and what it means to put your trust in the Lord, because they had been taught so much to hate and to murder and to rob and to plunder and to do those things which were not good. So my final thought on this is, in your life, I want you to think about what you've taught your children. I want you to think about what you've taught your brethren or your sisters or your family. Are those teachings buoying up people and bringing people to the Lord, or are those types of things not? And ultimately, I think that's what we can gain out of this lesson today. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys attending today. I hope you have a wonderful Sabbath day. Remember, next week is Mother's Day. And Katie obviously wants to say goodbye. I think they giggle more than they listen. But we appreciate it. Love you guys. I hope you have a wonderful week. Remember, May the 4th is tomorrow, Star Wars Day. As you can see, I'm definitely prepared. May the 5th, obviously, was Cinco de Mayo, which is also Taco Tuesday. And then finally, Mother's Day next week. So be sure to remember your mothers and stay tuned for the lesson next week. We're going to learn a lot about King Noah and this son of Zeniff, who unfortunately goes down a not so good path. So take care,
Wash
guys.
your hands.
Okay, Dad.